Okay, terrific. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for your time. I'm really pleased to be here. This is a presentation that we have done, with some modifications for a number of state agencies. And it's really a pleasure to be here to do this for the Justice Center. We are well aware at the Office of Mental Health, the additional burdens that you all have shouldered in the last year in support of the people that we serve. So that's a personal thank you on my behalf. And we hope that this content is a little bit helpful to you as you are managing the additional stress and anxiety on top of a job that, at baseline can be quite stressful as well. So we'll go ahead and get started. The agenda for the day is to talk through, normal reactions to crises, what we know from the disaster mental health literature, and what we've learned over the last year, looking at mental health effects, mental health consequences of the pandemic. We'll talk a little bit about assessing your own stress level, and the frame that we're going to use today is the stress inoculation model. I am sure that all of you have been thinking a lot about inoculation in the biological sense in the last several months, and so thinking about inoculation in the psychological sense, how can we prepare ourselves knowing that we're going into stressful situations? Depending on time, we'll spend some time on just different types of self-care strategies. We know that different things work for different people. And I'll try to spotlight some of the techniques that might be available to you while you're in the context that is stressful, things that hopefully, don't take a lot of time, aren't expensive, don't take a lot of attention, and you're able to do kind of in the course of sitting through your workday or getting through whatever stress you're going through at home. And we'll share a little bit of resources, and then as Meg referenced, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to leave time to answer them. So kind of starting with some basic definitions, a crisis is the perception or the experiencing of an event or situation as intolerable and exceeding current resources and coping mechanisms. There is a very robust literature in disaster mental health. In the past, many of the situations that we've had kind of in modern times have tended to be like man-made disasters like acts of terrorism, or natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes. That said, from situations like the Ebola or H1N1 or MERS or SARS, we do know a little bit about disaster mental health in the context of a pandemic. And of course, from the last year, we know a lot more. And so what we are aware of is that just like a man-made disaster or a natural disaster, a pandemic, an infection-based disaster, if you will lead to the similar types of crisis reactions. Everybody has a reaction to a crisis, and it kind of falls in the middle of, for most people, it's much more than simple stress. And at the same time, even though reactions can be very extreme and very overwhelming, for the vast majority of people, it is not mental illness, including things like, you could show depressive symptoms and anxious symptoms and post-traumatic symptoms without ending up with a depressive disorder, an anxiety disorder, or a post-traumatic stress disorder. For some people, it will be important to get professional help to kind of get back to baseline. But for many people, your natural coping skills will get you through the crisis reactions that you have. So it's really important to stress this fact that stress and anxiety are absolutely normal reactions to a totally abnormal situation. And again, let me stress that that includes when you are feeling like you might have very extreme or intense reactions. Typically what happens is that after an initial stress response, most people experiencing a disaster will cope effectively and grow stronger. However, we're in an interesting situation here where, a year in, without exactly knowing where the end is going to be, people might be experiencing this cycle more than once. Whereas, with something like a hurricane or a tornado, it's a little bit more common that you might see an initial stress response, even an extended initial stress response, but then a period of moving toward coping. Whereas, in the last year, it's possible that you have experienced that multiple times at this point. I think it's always important to acknowledge that in addition to the stress of the crisis, there are lots of additional sources of stress as well. I mean, I definitely don't mean to at 9:30 in the morning make you sit around and think of all the reasons that things are rough. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge and validate the types of things that you might be going through. And oftentimes when we're in kind of this go, go, go mode, especially in the types of work that you do at the Justice Center, it can be hard to sit down and appreciate, oh man, there's like 4 or 5 layers of things here that I'm dealing with. And so for many people, pre-existing stressors can be exacerbated. The fact that there's a pandemic, doesn't mean that all of a sudden you're worried about your kid's attention disorder, or, your financial troubles or your marital troubles have gone away, right? So there's that level of, hey, this is what, as a regular human being, I was just walking into the pandemic with this stuff and I didn't get to, throw all of that baggage down to pick up my pandemic stress, right? You picked up some more bags along the way. We know that caring for others who are experiencing reactions while caring for yourself can be an additional source of stress. So as you're surrounded by people who are having their own crisis reactions, that can be an additional source. For many of us over the last year, we've experienced bereavement and complicated grief. So in some cases, uncomplicated grief, but in many cases, complicated grief. And the range of reactions to grief can be very surprising and confusing, especially if you lost someone in a traumatic way. And almost by definition, if you lost someone to COVID-19, it was traumatic. It was sudden. You probably didn't get a chance to be with them near the end of life. And it may have been kind of a violent death. And then on top of all of those things, then there's just like the normal new stresses that pop up as well. And again, I don't say this to like bum you out, more to highlight the importance of really acknowledging to yourself, there's a lot going on, and I deserve to be able to take care of myself and manage some of this stress. One of the things that we talk about a lot is that, just like anything else, there's very individual reactions to a crisis. And many people react in totally different ways. And even in like a family unit, or maybe the people that you live with, it's possible that you are reacting in one particular way, and somebody else, at a similar stress level looks, has symptoms, quote unquote, in a totally different domain. So we see things like physical effects, like increased heart rate or chills, cognitive effects like having trouble paying attention, having trouble problem solving, spiritual effects, questioning maybe a faith that you had or changing some of the things that you believe, emotional effects like mood changes, irritability, feeling hopeless, many behavioral changes, things like, difficulty or changes in eating and sleeping, increased use of substances. Maybe many of us are picking fights with our significant others, or, finding ourselves kind of just like scrolling our phone all night long. And oftentimes kind of the root cause of those might be your stress and anxiety reaction to the crisis. So it's important to remember that we may experience a wide range of emotions when faced with a crisis or a disaster. Again, especially one that's so long lasting. You might be able to think back over the last year, think about yourself or a loved one and say, yep, back in March, I was in panic mode. And then in the fall, my mood was super low. And then, in January, I started drinking a little bit more than I would want to, that kind of thing. one of the things that can be helpful is really to identify those emotions that you are struggling with, and allow yourself to experience them without judgment. Letting yourself know, hey, every single person on the globe is going through this. It is okay to be feeling these things. It is normal to be feeling these things. And in all likelihood, I will feel better in the future. If you are struggling a lot, it might also be helpful to reach out for more help, whether that's, to more informal help or more professional help. And we can talk a little bit about that too. I just want to again highlight here the importance of really, normalizing that this is what is happening to everybody, and normalizing that to yourself, that it is okay if you are feeling these stress and anxiety reactions. So let's talk a little bit about assessing your stress level as a helper. And I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of using the word helper here. I think that many people who in the last year who may not have defined themselves as helpers have become helpers. Like when I've done this talk to folks at, tax and finance or the Department of Labor, they may not have kind of seen themselves as in the helping professions. And all of a sudden, last March and April, basically everybody who was a New York State employee became a helper of one sort or another. However, I think that for employees of the Justice Center, you all are in helping professions at baseline. And during the pandemic, I think that identity has probably been heightened, that the work you do is really to support others. And so there's kind of two sides of this coin, right? There's the helper satisfaction side of the coin, that helpers get a lot out of that role. And there's the other side that we'll talk about, the fatigue that can come with that being a piece of your identity. And so in a crisis, helpers often report satisfaction from their involvement. And so, if you're kind of like a first responder, or back in March and April, if you were a person who was able to organize, like sew masks, or you were a nurse or something like that, or after a hurricane, if you're a person who goes in to do crisis counseling or to help people rebuild their houses or something like that, people do feel that gratification from helping others, and you can feel empowered that there's something that you can do. It's a change from maybe the kind of things that you do day to day. And people often report you can feel close to the other folks who are in that role and have that identity. Oftentimes helpers underestimate their impact on others. Oftentimes helpers are the type of people who say, well, I really did so little. I wish I could have done more. And yet what we hear over and over is just that those little touches make a huge, huge difference. And so like if you're working on a helpline or something like that, we hear from the helper side, all I could do is listen to that person. I wasn't able to solve their unemployment problem. I wasn't able to solve their domestic violence problem. I really felt so helpless. And then on the other side, the caller will say, oh my gosh, just to have somebody who listened to me, that made such a big difference for me. So the flip side of the coin, right, is challenges that come along with that identity. As you know, the baseline demands on helpers are often high. The type of work that you do is stressful, even outside of any additional crisis. And one of the things that, that happens is that the fundamental culture of the organization is that if all of the resources get put toward how can we help the service recipients or help the patients or whoever it is, right, that you help. The emotional and psychological well-being of the helper and of the helper organization is very often secondary to the emotional and the psychological needs of the people that you are trying to help. One of the things that we have experienced in the last year is that, people in the helping professions kind of, dive in, ready to keep other people afloat, And here we are in a situation where you have no idea how much longer you're going to have to swim, right? You're just going and going and going, trying to stay afloat so that you can keep someone else afloat. And there's lots of challenges that come along with being in that helper role. You know, isolation and pressure, limited resources, changing the role that you're working in, trying to respond to changes in guidelines that might seem sudden or might seem arbitrary. So all of these together really lead to particular psychological challenges for people in the helping professions. I want to talk about a little kind of metaphor here, and I want to give full credit to the Institute for Disaster Mental Health out of SUNY New Paltz for this kind of visual that I thought was really helpful in terms of assessing your stress level. So they use the check engine light / the broken tail light. So the check engine light, you know, when it comes on in your car, you're kind of like, well, I know something is wrong, but I don't know exactly what is wrong. And it would be really great to get that figured out, but I don't have time to do that. So I'm just going to keep driving around, maybe hoping that it disappears, and really hoping against hope that I don't have a total breakdown because I didn't take care of whatever it was that was leading to that. So it's that idea that you don't even have time to figure out what exactly is going wrong. And there's a bit of you that's kind of like, maybe it'll just go away if I don't, you know, go to the auto shop. And then a different piece of the car, if you will, is, you know, maybe your check engine light is not on. But you are driving around with a broken taillight and people are trying to flag you down all the time saying, and you kind of keep going because you're like, everything seems like it's going swimmingly to me. And maybe your spouse or maybe your colleague keeps asking, you know, hey, you doing all right? Just checking in with you. And you're thinking, why are all these people checking in with me all the time? You can't see it, so you just keep putting it out of mind. I mean, and both of these are kind of metaphors for, you know, where's your stress level at, right? How are you doing when those little warning signs come up that maybe either you're seeing or you're not seeing, but people around you are seeing? So the equivalent of some of these warning signs for you might be any of these or more, right? Could be sleeplessness, could be anxiety, it could be thinking about hurting yourself or killing yourself. It could be changes in your libido, changes in your mood, physical symptoms like headache, stomach ache, change in appetite. Could be things like hormonal acne popping up. You know, and your loved ones know what are those check engine broken taillights for you. If we go a little bit technical into the occupational hazards of helping, some of the terms that you might have heard about are compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue kind of being the, you know, the other side of compassion satisfaction, which is, you know, you all of a sudden, or not all of a sudden, after an intense period of giving and giving and giving, you kind of overextended your ability to care. And maybe some of the situations that you would have been more easily able to engage and kind of tap into that compassionate side of yourself, you're a little bit less able to do that because you've burned out that capacity by just going for so long. You may also have heard about, and these kind of go under the heading of compassion fatigue, burnout or secondary trauma. So burnout kind of being just a gradual exhaustion of your emotional energy, and secondary trauma kind of being traumatic symptoms that post-traumatic symptoms you're experiencing yourself. Although you weren't the one exposed to the trauma, it's because you've been working with or helping people who have been traumatized, and then vicariously you're traumatized as well. I want to point out here, and I'll show you, I think on the next slide, this whole section is about assessing your stress level. And so one of the tools that maybe many of you are quite familiar with is the ProQoL. And so that's a little abbreviation for the professional quality of life measure. And the model that they use here, should be a little familiar from what we've talked about in the last few minutes, that your professional quality of life has a compassion satisfaction side to it and a compassion fatigue side to it. And underneath the fatigue, it might be attributable to burnout or secondary trauma. What I like about this, I'll come back to there, is that if you go to proquol.org, you see this assessment in it's totally free. You can take it and it will score it you can self-score it. I've only shown the first 4 items here, but it is a little bit lengthy, but it's actually kind of helpful to go through. And then you score it and it will give you scores on subscales of burnout, compassion fatigue, and secondary trauma. And it will give you suggestions around each of those to try to figure out, hey, it seems like pinpointing, this is the way that this is really getting to you. And so these are some suggestions about that. And I pop back here and say, these are kind of obvious, and just setting up why it's so important to be taking care of yourself to the extent that you can, is that we know that when you're experiencing that fatigue, we do see things like errors that might affect the people that you're actually trying to help. We see effects on non-work systems like spillover into your family life or your personal relationships, and we certainly see effects on mental health, physical health, and increased use of substances. So let me now, I think 25 minutes in, try to pop into the more hopeful, kind of productive side of this presentation. So hopefully you're not, hopefully you didn't walk in and now you're super stressed from hearing about all of that. It is important to kind of really acknowledge what you all have been going through, and to think about, hey, this is pretty important. It is as important for you to think about ways to manage your own stress, take care of yourself, as it is to spend all the time that you do every day thinking about how to help other people as well. So I want to talk a little bit about stress inoculation as an umbrella strategy for all types of self-care strategies that we can talk about a little bit later. Stress inoculation comes out of kind of like the cognitive literature, but it's been used like not just in psychotherapy, it's been used like in the military and lots of kind of first responder organizations to frame how you can approach situations that we know when you're asked to go into, and when you're asked to go into, that it is going to have those stress and anxiety effects on you. So the reason that we do all of this, obviously, is that people who don't take care of themselves are not going to be able to take care of others or meet their professional demands. And for yourself, as well as for your employees, it's really important to try to reframe self-care as, this thing that if you have time, you try to do, and change that to really understanding it as an absolute ethical imperative that you take the steps to manage your own stress, because it truly does have effects on your professional performance as well as your personal life. And so not doing that, and supervisors not making the room or the culture to take care of yourself ends up with professional problems down the line. I want to talk a little bit about common barriers to self-care, and I think, in helper organizations in particular, people often can identify with these. So I'll go through them. One is a lack of training. and that's kind of like the lowest hanging fruit. If you're like, hey, I really want to take care of myself and I'm not really sure how to do this. That's not like often the case in a helper organization. Often you've been telling other people how to take care of themselves for a long time. But for some people, there might be, oh, I never thought of that. I just didn't know some of these strategies. There's the myth of professional immunity. And I think helpers are very prone to this, like this, what I do is that I take care of other people. I don't actually need help myself. There's a challenge with stigma, and certainly this is an organizational culture issue, but oftentimes organizations might actually be more flexible than you think, and it might really, some part of it might be an internalized stigma around. They'll think that I can't handle the job if I ask for help. Negative self-talk, especially comparative, everyone else seems to be managing. I must be weak, or there must be something wrong with me for being the person who can't manage. And I do think that telecommuting might actually make this worse in some ways, because you're not able to see kind of the fuller picture of the person maybe breaking down next to you or being irritable. People, you might only see like more captured snippets of, hey, they seem to be fine. They seem to be able to, approach this with good cheer. And they don't realize, and I'm the only one who's really, every time I turn off my video, feel like I'm about to have a breakdown. And then one that we hear a ton about is guilt. People are dealing with way worse things, especially if you're a helper. You often see day to day people who are dealing with, a kind of even maybe objectively worse experiences than you're going through. And why should I get the luxury of, taking time for myself to manage when they don't have that? And, I would bring all of these, acknowledging all these points and going back to, if you are unable to actually manage your stress, you will end up not being able to be useful to any of the folks that your identity is about helping. And so framing it that way is kind of an ethical directive, an ethical responsibility, I think can help alleviate some of that guilt and that cycle of negative self-talk that you can get into, that it's not something that you deserve to be able to do. When we talk about disaster mental health, one of the big, frames that we use is really everybody has gotten through hard times before. Wherever you are in your life, if you're sitting here listening to this webinar, you have gone through challenges, and maybe you've gone through much more significant challenges than people around you really know about. There's a lot that you already bring with you to this day, April 1st, 2021. You have skills, you have strengths, and you have a network around you. And sometimes taking that moment to think, okay, how have I done this before? What did I do last time things were hard? Who did I reach out to last time I was struggling? Can be a start of kind of that stress management plan that we're going to talk about. This is credited to, actually, unfortunately, don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's around performance management in the context of stress, and it's from the military. But many of the exercises are applicable beyond that setting. So I put the credit there, and Tara will put the link in the chat as well. But as we go into talking about stress inoculation, this is a way to think about framing that. So you may have heard of this kind of like circles of control, circles of influence, circles of concern. So everybody has things that they worry about all the time. I'm worried about whatever it is. I can certainly probably list for 24 hours in a row all the things that I'm concerned about now and in the future. But there's a much, 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 much smaller circle of things that I actually have influence over. And then an even smaller circle of things that I actually have control over. And looking at this from what is it that I can control versus what is it that I must accept can really help you become more resilient, because what we see is that the more energy that you spend on things that you really can't control leads to that burnout, because you're just kind of losing your energy without ever getting anything back for it. So I think that sets us up to talk about stress inoculation. So the goal of anything, certainly the goal of stress inoculation, but the goal of any type of stress management is to manage stress, not to get rid of it, right? There's not actually a way to eliminate stress in your life at all. It really is much more about, okay, this is what I am walking into. How can I feel like there are things that I can control in this situation? Stress inoculation is really about spending time ahead of the stressful situation to kind of wrap your head around it. One of the things that you might be thinking, or that we hear as, a little bit of resistance to stress inoculation is like, hey, if I'm going into a bad situation, why am I going to stress myself out beforehand, spending even more time thinking about it? And I think this is actually a place where we're kind of in like a good moment in history, where the vaccine analogy does actually serve very well, in that a vaccine, which is a biological inoculation, really gives you that, gives your body the warning for when you actually encounter the real biological agent, and so you're ready ahead of time. And I think it is stressful to actually spend a little bit of time beforehand. It's one of those things where you're playing the long game a little bit. Preparing in advance does help you acknowledge that the stress exists and will impact you. And going into that knowing, hey, this is gonna be hard, actually makes it significantly less hard in the moment. There's a lot of good research about just informing people that, you're going to boot camp. The first 5 days are going to feel absolutely awful. The folks who are informed of that and spend a little bit of time thinking about it do much better than the folks who don't spend a little bit of time thinking about it. Managing those expectations and knowing, I might feel overwhelmed. I might feel fatigued. I might feel really anxious in the actual situation. All of those emotions tend to be at lower intensity because you have set up the expectation that they will come. And so that, again, predicting the intensity of what you're likely to experience, and then actually doing the practice for, okay, if this stressor that I predicted comes along, here's the strategy that I am going to use to cope with it. Now, 100% of the time, are you going to be able to pull out your self-care strategy? Definitely not, right? At the same time, what we know is that the very worst time to figure out your self-care strategy is in the moment of crisis. Our brains are really not set up to be able to think rationally in that moment. Whereas if you have written down or even thought about, here's a couple of things that I can do, you can pull on those even when your brain is not in that rational state. So 4 components of stress inoculation. Again, if you've gone through any kind of like cognitive therapy, this will be familiar to you, but again, it doesn't have to be in the therapeutic setting that you're doing it. So number 1 is to identify potential stressors. And so really thinking about, what is coming up. And if you know you're going into a stressful situation, try to think as specifically as possible about what about it you might find most stressful. Is it going to be like, let's even say it's like a Zoom meeting that is coming up. And that hearing a particular person talk or hearing a particular phrase is going to be really stressful to you. If we kind of up the ante a little bit, is it going to be that somebody else is distressed and you know that's going to be difficult for you? Is it going to be that you're asked to do something that you don't feel confident about doing? Is it just going to be the lingering uncertainty about what comes next that's hard for you? And obviously, this is not an exhaustive list, but the potential stressors in any given situation, if 5 people are walking into a Zoom meeting, what's going to stress each person out is going to be totally different, right? For one person, it could be that we're walking out without any, directions. For another person, it could be that we're walking out with too many directions. So you know yourself and you know what's going to be stressful about the situation. The second step is to appraise the potential stressor. And so anytime that we experience stress, we make an evaluation about do we have the ability to meet that stressor? And the way that we behave depends on whether we see that stressful situation as a threat that's going to overwhelm us, or we see that stressful situation as a challenge that we are going to be able to meet. If something is appraised as a threat, if you know that something is going to feel overwhelming, your coping mechanisms can become overwhelmed, and you can limit your coping skills to things that might be minimally effective, or you might actually find yourself kind of paralyzed, like unable to react to something. You're likely to, if you see a threat, you're likely to be like, I can't do this, I can't deal with this, I don't know what to do. And then that appraisal in and of itself can lead to an inability to cope or problem solve. On the other hand, if you're able to look at a situation and say, okay, this is a challenge that I can meet, you're much more likely to be able to use the skills that you have. And you're likely to be able to not just pull on like 1 or 2 skills, but a variety of coping skills that you're maybe even utilizing at once, and break the situation into pieces that you can actually, move things into that circle of control and move toward productive action. The important thing to recognize here is that this is an evaluation. It could be the exact same stressor that you see as a threat or you see as a challenge. So nothing has changed about the stressor, just how you are approaching it can make the difference between, are you frozen? Are you thinking that I can't do this? Or you're moving into, all right, okay, here's a small piece that I can handle. Where do I start? You also want to appraise whether the stressor is under your control or not under your control. And can you actually change it? And if so, how are you going to do that? And if not, how are you going to accept that? When something is under your control, you can use a problem-focused coping strategy, which, many of us are familiar with in the working environment. All right, here's a problem in front of us. How do we break this up? How do we attack each aspect of it? And how do we get ourselves to the outcome that we want? If something's not under your control, it's not useful to use a problem-focused coping strategy. And moving into that, all right, this is not under my control. I still am going to be stressed about it. I'm still going to have emotions about it. But what I need to do is manage those emotions because I can't do anything about the actual challenge. And we'll talk about some of these. I am watching the time. I'm not doing a very good job on time management, sorry, but we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that you might use to, when you said, all right, there's nothing I can do about this, but I still need to manage my stress. I'm actually gonna skip this part to go to this flow chart about, okay, so when you've identified your potential stressors and you're appraising them either as a threat or a challenge. If we look at the right side here, if something's a challenge, is it something that you can control or change? If it is, try those problem-focused coping strategies. If it's not, try those emotion-focused coping strategies. And then if you're remember you're doing all of this before the stressor has come along. If you find yourself thinking, all right, if that happens, I know that I'm going to feel totally overwhelmed. I know that I'm going to be in that threatened space. Then some of the work is that because you're doing this before that moment, is trying to figure out, all right, is there a different way to look at this where it is something that I might be able to meet? Is there a way that I can break it up into, even though it's threatening, there's a piece of this that I can see as a challenge? Is it that it's going to be a threat if I'm approaching it by myself, but if I, bring some colleagues in together, we can think of it as a challenge. And then you can move into figuring out what kind of coping strategies you're going to use. And the whole point of inoculation, again, is that you're spending the time ahead of time to say, hey, this is probably what's going to come up. This is probably how I'm going to feel about it. And then this is how I'm going to think about coping with it. And remembering that there are, in this no box, there are things that you're not going to be able to control or change. And all you can do is manage your own emotions about it. So moving particularly into this box over here, some emotion-focused coping strategies, right? Like the yes box here, these are the kinds of things that you do every day in your organization, problem-focused coping strategies, and probably we're much better at those because we practice those kinds of skills all the time. I think it is actually harder when you are like, okay, this is a challenge and it's going to be stressful and there's nothing that I'm going to be able to do about it. So all I can do is manage my response to it. So moving into what are some of those emotion-focused coping strategies that you might be able to use. Number one is do not underestimate the basics. The basics are often the first to go when you're stressed out. So these are the things that can help you the most, but when you're experiencing that stress and anxiety, it's so common that your sleep will change. It's so common that you won't have time to eat. It's so common that you are working all the time and you won't even remember to get up to stand or walk around for a little bit or talk to anybody other than your colleagues. And so these are the first to go. And if you can make them the first to come back, they often go a very long way to be able to manage stress. So sleep enough, try to sleep in a routine, personal grooming, if you're a person who your hygiene involves shaving or makeup or dressing in your professional clothes, that kind of thing can make a big difference. But also we're talking obviously about basics like just taking a shower, putting deodorant on, rinsing your face, that kind of thing. Taking breaks, trying to eat, nutritious food at regular intervals, physical activity, trying to spend a little bit of time outside, and trying to connect with others. So these are just the, the basic makeup of living a human life. But again, these are the first things that might go away when you're in that stressful situation. And then we flip to, what are some of the strategies that might be helpful in the moment to you, but might be ineffective in the long term, right? So like maybe you find yourself overworking, maybe you find yourself problematic gambling or isolating yourself, watching too much TV, becoming controlling. No, I want to be clear, no judgment about any of these things, right? Like the reason that you're doing these is because in that moment, they are helping you cope. And at the same time, as you if you're doing them over and over and over and you find that this is your pattern, these are things that might be kind of less healthy in the long run. And you might want to try to figure out what are some strategies that might be a little bit more effective for me, both here and now and in the long run. So I think I didn't put a transition slide here, but we'll talk about 3 different categories of self-care strategies, sensory and behavioral, social, and cognitive. And so in the sensory and behavioral strategies, this is a non-exhaustive list, but the types of things that might be helpful to you in that emotion-focused bucket of, taking scheduled breaks, doing some physical activity, and we'll go through some of the breathing distraction and mindfulness exercises here in progressive muscle relaxation. So I think I spoke at the beginning about kind of like spotlight self-care. The reason that I want to spotlight a couple of these over others is that particularly in the situations that you're in, where you really might not have time to, do really big, do a restful 3-day weekend retreat or something like that. These are the kind of activities that wherever you are, if you're in a meeting, if you're out in the field, that they don't take, they're not expensive, they don't take any special equipment, and they don't really take a ton of skill more than knowing that, hey, this is something that might be useful to me. So taking breathing breaks throughout the day, just taking a moment, is this something that if your organization or your colleagues are open to it, something that you can do together? If this is something that you don't think that, that would make sense, you can, do it in the bathroom or turn off your video for a second and just stand up, take a deep breath while raising your arms, and then exhale as you're lowering your arms. You do that for a few times, really helps you reset a little bit. 4-7-8 breathing is something that many of you may have heard about. I really like this one because, again, it just focuses down to, all right, this isn't going to take more than 19 seconds altogether. Hopefully I did the math right there. But it can make a big difference for just that little period of time. And this is something that you can do while you're on video, while someone else is talking, and nobody needs to know that you are doing this little reset. So this is breathing in through your nose while you're counting to 4, holding your breath while you are counting to 7, and then releasing your breath through your mouth while you're counting to 8. And oftentimes it's helpful to do this a few times in a row. I'm going to skip this watching the time, but Char's going to put on the in the chat. We did a bunch of graphics and little videos that you can use to do breathing exercises with if you're thinking that this is something that could be helpful to you. Oh, I guess I won't skip it here. And that goes on for about a minute. And there's some really cute ones that for kids too, that are just really nice ways to help you, manage your breathing. And all of them are just about 60 seconds long. I'm going to do another spotlight here on distraction techniques. And again, this is in that category of, hey, I know something is going to be stressful to me. And I know that there might be nothing that I can do about it. And so how do I accept that and deal with the emotions that are coming up? Distraction is another good one because, again, it's free. You don't need any equipment for it. You don't need a lot of time for it. You don't need particular skills for it, right? So could just be you are really having a really hard time in a particular meeting or with a particular project, and just having your brain focus on something different for a minute can be really helpful. So pick a color, look around the room you're in, and don't stop until you've named everything that is that color. Pick a category, like there are a couple examples here, and go through the alphabet without pausing while you're naming examples. So if you pick car models, you could do Acura, Bentley, Corolla, Dodge. I'm going to stop because I really don't know a lot about cars, and so I can't think of an E, but maybe you've thought of one. Or, alligator, boa constrictor, cat, dog, elephant, fish, gorilla, hippo, that kind of thing. This is a really helpful one because really it's something that is within anybody's capability to do. And it is very, very difficult to think about anything else while you're doing this because your brain is trying to think ahead to the next letter and trying to come up with the exemplar for that one. This is also a really fun one to do with a partner, and kids can do it as well, right? So you could say, I'll do the A, you do the B, I'll do the C, or you could do it in a group. And when you're doing it in a group too, your brain is really focused on, all right, what letter is going to come to me and what am I going to say for it? And so being able to fully distract yourself even for a minute or two, because we know humans are very bad at thinking about two things at the same time. And so if you put your full attention into this, it really can be a mental break if you've been just ruminating nonstop about something that is out of your control. I mean, and obviously it's endless. You could pick types of food, or if you're doing it with a loved one, you could think about a particular memory. Let's think about all the things that we did when we were at Lake Placid, and see if we can, adapt the game to that. And then a little bit on the, similarly, how to get your brain off something that you can't control, mindfulness strategies, right? So these are a little bit more just bringing yourself down to observing and noticing what's going on without passing judgment. and really trying to put yourself into that moment fully. So it could be you could do it around texture, like picking up something and holding it. You could do it around mindful eating, so drinking or eating something is kind of taking notice of the texture, the taste, the sensation, the temperature as you are mindfully eating or mindfully drinking. Do a spotlight. There's a lot of spotlights in this category because this tends to be, sensory and behavioral tends to be a category that, again, you can often do without other people noticing, and you can often do no matter where you are. So progressive muscle relaxation, you could literally do if you're in the middle of a stressful situation and you're around other people, and this is something that can really help your body, but they don't need to know that you're engaging in this. And so progressive muscle relaxation comes from the knowledge that when your stress level is high, your muscles do tense. And so even though it may sound counterintuitive, actually purposefully tensing them and then relaxing them can tell your brain, okay, I can calm down. I don't need to be this stressed right now. There's 100 different ways to do progressive muscle relaxation, but one of the ways to do it would be, starting from the bottom to the top of your body, just tensing your muscles, unit by unit for 8 seconds or 10 seconds, and then slowly relaxing them. And again, nobody can tell that you're doing this because you're not actually moving your body at any time. But by the end of it, you will end up in a bit of a different mental state than when you started. Moving into social strategies, as compared with sensory and behavioral strategies, these might take a little bit more time. These might take a little bit more energy, and oftentimes they are they are some of the most effective in terms of return on investment, especially in the middle of a crisis. So connecting with others really is the single most helpful strategy, and particularly true in the last year when we have all been so isolated. But other types of social strategies, using your spiritual resources, acceptance, thinking about, the folks around you, and thinking through the things that maybe you're having trouble with them, and really consciously practicing, all right, I'm going to let that go because that might be something that they're struggling with. Allowing yourself to receive as well as give. This can be pretty tough for a helper. Maybe your identity is a lot more about giving, but actually letting others give to you can be helpful both to you and to them. Volunteering, taking care of not just other people, but spending your energy on pets or plants or things like that can also make a big difference. I think I just did one spotlight in social strategies, and the one that I'm highlighting here is just, the power of compassion, the power of just taking a moment to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. And, reminding yourself through a little note or a little mantra that this is a traumatic event of absolutely overwhelming proportions. You are doing your best, and you are doing a good job. And, letting yourself believe that, and then practicing that same kind of kindness to others. I am very aware that we are only 3 minutes out. So my apologies for skipping through this, but I am going to skip through to the resources here. And because I hope that some of these, because you'll have the slides, and I hope that some of these can help you pass the next few minutes here. So in terms of resources, the Office of Mental Health has a number of COVID-19 resources, tips. Our social media pages are often, Instagram and Facebook are putting, breathing exercises and lots of infographics and things like that. I'm going to pop to here. This is an example of the type of thing that we've put out, tips for helping others grieve. This is with the loss or reminders when you're coping with grief yourself. Here, Tar can put the link in, but if you're a person who's like, all right, that was a lot, where might I start with this? The DHHS has put out this emergency responder self-care plan. And although it looks like it's for healthcare workers only, it definitely will work with anybody in the type of situation that you're in. And it really kind of goes through, it doesn't call it stress inoculation, but it goes through that model of like what's likely to come up and what are the skills that I'm going to use when these things come up. It's a 2-page PDF, and it's pretty easy to fill out, and it might be something that you do by yourself, or it might be something that you might pass out as a resource to your team. This is just more stuff on the OMH website. And then last that I want to highlight, and hopefully you've all heard about it, is that the OMH with FEMA funding runs the emotional support helpline. So there's trained crisis counselors who are on every single day. They've been on since March 25th, 7 days a week, 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., always confidential, always anonymous, always free. And we have had thousands and thousands and thousands of callers from New York State and around the country just to have a listening ear for the stresses that you are experiencing. And then the Project Hope website, Project Hope runs the helpline. They have resources and coping strategies, relaxation tips, and things like that. So let me end, not having left time for questions, I'm sorry, with a genuine thank you for the work that you do every day. Really, everything that you do is so appreciated, and you are making a difference every single day.
Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined, and thank you to our wonderful presenter, Dr. Kuriakose. We really appreciate your time and everything you've shared. I know every time we've done one of these webinars together over the last year plus, I've taken a little kernel of information for my own self-care and management, and just really appreciate everything. So I do hope that everyone was able to learn from our webinar today and hopefully take some tools and resources with them. And as we shared, this is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be distributed, so everyone will have access to this really important information after the fact. So thank you again to our wonderful presenter, to my colleague Tara, and to you all for joining. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much, Meg.
Take care.